Most people remember Elvis Presley beneath the roar of concert lights, a golden microphone in his hand, and a sea of faces chanting his name. But almost no one knows about the room he kept in the shadows. A soundproof chamber, buried deep within Graceland, where applause could never reach and where he spoke, not to an audience, but to the quiet. This room had no windows, no gold records on the walls, no polished mirrors like the dressing rooms. Backstage, only a single red light above an old tape machine, a worn leather chair, and the soft smell of dust, wood, and cigarette smoke soaked into the walls. It was the only place on earth where Elvis wasn't the king. Here, he was just a man tired, lonely, and desperate to be heard without judgment, without headlines, without the weight of being America's dream. Some say he built it in 1967. At the height of his fame, when the cheers outside grew so loud that he could no longer hear his own thoughts. Others believe it was older, a private promise he made to himself after his mother died, that no matter how bright the lights became, he would keep one place untouched by fame, a place where truth could live, even if no one ever heard it. Late at night, when the rest of Graceland slept, Elvis would slip past the darkened hallways, open the heavy door, sit down alone and press record. No orchestra, no band, just his voice, soft, cracked, sometimes trembling as he spoke about the things the world never let him say out loud. Secrets about his fears, the loneliness behind every standing ovation, the guilt of being loved by millions, but unable to save the few people who mattered most. What no one tells you is that this room still exists, untouched, sealed beneath layers of time and silence. And inside it, hidden on tapes that were never meant for radio or records, lives the only version of Elvis that was truly real. They say every empire has a quiet place where its king goes to remember he is human. And for Elvis, that place wasn't the stage, or the limousine rides through cheering streets. It was that hidden room beneath Graceland, far from the polished grand pianos and glittering chandeliers where visitors snapped souvenir photographs. It didn't appear on any blueprint, not in official tours, not even in whispers among staff, because Elvis himself had chosen to keep it that way. People close to him noticed something change after his mother, Gladys, passed in 1958. The boy from Tupelo, who once sang gospel in tiny churches, now stood under blinding lights before thousands, but his eyes seemed forever searching for someone who was no longer there. Fame arrived like a storm, loud, bright, unstoppable, but grief stayed like fog, quiet and suffocating. In the years that followed, Elvis bought Graceland not just as a home, but as a shield from a world that demanded more of him than any man could give. Yet even within those walls, he couldn't escape the echo of expectations, the phone calls, managers, contracts, rehearsals, headlines, all reminding him he was no longer just a man, but a symbol America refused to let rest. That is when he began designing the secret recording room, not as a studio for music, but as a sanctuary for truth. He chose a spot deep in the basement where the walls were thick, reinforced with layers of insulation, so no sound could leak through, no matter how soft or broken. The door was solid oak, with a lock only he and one trusted engineer knew about. Inside, the lighting was dim, a single lamp casting a warm circle over a battered table where an old reel-to-reel tape machine sat like a silent witness. The room smelled of leather, wood polish, and a hint of the cologne he always wore, musk, sandalwood, something nostalgically southern. After dinner, when Graceland's hallways went quiet, and even the guards outside were leaning into their coats against the night air, Elvis would walk slowly down the staircase, sometimes barefoot, sometimes still in his stage clothes with glittering cuffs brushing the walls. He wouldn't bring his guitar at first, only a cup of coffee or a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly as he closed the heavy door behind him. Then he would sit, take a deep breath, press the red button on the tape recorder, and for a moment just listen to the silence, as though waiting for the courage to speak. And when he finally spoke, his voice was nothing like the powerful baritone the world knew. It was softer, cracked around the edges, like a man talking to a ghost. In those tapes, he spoke about missing his mother, about praying every night that she could hear him from heaven. He confessed he felt like a fraud sometimes, standing on stage smiling while his heart felt like it was sinking deeper into something cold and unnamed. He whispered about the nights he couldn't sleep, pacing the halls while the rest of the world thought he was living a dream. He talked about Priscilla, how he loved her, how he feared losing her, how fame had built a wall between them no hand could climb. His words weren't polished or poetic, they were raw, unfiltered, sometimes stumbling, the kind of truths a man only says when he believes no one will ever hear them. Some nights he would cry quietly, so no guard outside would notice, but the microphone caught the sound of his breath breaking, the way he would pause mid-sentence and rub his eyes. Other nights he would sing softly, not for a record, but like a prayer into the darkness, old gospel hymns, lullabies his mother once hummed, unfinished melodies that seemed to fade before they fully formed. The tapes captured it all, the shifting of his chair, the clink of ice in his glass, the distant hum of the air conditioning unit, and the haunting silence between words. He never labeled those tapes, just stacked them in a wooden box in the far corner of the room as though he himself wasn't sure what to do with them. Destroy them, or keep them as proof that somewhere beneath the crown, a real heart was still beating. Outside, the world kept spinning, records sold, crowds roared, magazines printed his face on every cover, but inside that room, time moved slower, like dust floating in slanted light. And though no one knew it then, those recordings would become the most honest legacy he ever left behind, a secret archive of a soul the world thought it already understood. Because what no one tells you is that Elvis didn't build that room to hide from the world. He built it to make sense of it, to have one place where he didn't have to perform, where he could finally speak without applause chasing the end of every sentence. As the years passed, the secret recording room became less of a refuge and more of a mirror Elvis couldn't turn away from, reflecting not just his voice but everything he tried to bury beneath the music, the costumes, the smiles for the cameras. By the early 1970s, the world still saw him as the eternal king of rock and roll, dazzling under the Las Vegas lights. But behind the scenes, his health was faltering, his spirit thinning like the worn fabric of the jumpsuits he wore. The pills he once took to stay awake for long, studio sessions or to fall asleep after, endless tours had become a quiet addiction, slipping into his life so gradually that even he couldn't tell when. Necessity turned into dependence. He still visited the room, the walls now darker with time, the tapes stacked taller, some unlabeled, some dated and hurried handwriting. But his entries became more desperate, the pauses longer, the silences heavier. In one recording, his voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't know who I am when the lights go off," and then stayed silent for nearly 2 minutes, as though hoping someone, anyone, might answer back. He talked about Lisa Marie, how he wished he could give her a normal father, not a man torn between two worlds, one that adored him and one that misunderstood him. He spoke of prayers he wasn't sure God still heard, of waking up some mornings unable to move from the weight pressing on his chest, not fame, but loneliness, an ache that sat in his bones. Sometimes he would bring his guitar again, let his fingers find familiar chords, singing softly into the microphone old hymns like Amazing Grace or Peace in the Valley, but his voice broke in places where it once soared, and it sounded less like a performance, more like a plea. He didn't cry as much in these later tapes. Instead, there was an exhaustion you could almost hear, a man no longer trying to fight the storm, but trying to understand why it chose him in the first place. Outside the room, Graceland continued to shine brightly. Christmas lights in winter, laughter from visiting friends, fans gathered at the gates, leaving letters and flowers and promises of devotion. But inside that small chamber, time felt frozen, held together only by the click of the tape reels turning slowly through the dark. By 1977, the room had become a place Elvis visited as often as he visited the stage, though no one except a close few even knew it existed. His final recordings in that room were not songs, but stories, memories of his childhood in Tupelo, walking barefoot on dirt roads, sharing a single sandwich with his mama. Because money was scarce, but love was always there. He talked about the first time he heard gospel at a revival tent, how the voices rose like flames into the night, and he felt something inside him open, like a door he couldn't close again. He remembered the day he bought Graceland, how he told himself it would be a place of peace, not just for him, but for everyone he loved. And yet the irony lay heavy in his words, that the house had become a palace and a prison all at once. In one of the final tapes, his voice trembling but steady, he said, "If they ever find these recordings, I hope they don't hear a king. I hope they hear a man." Those may have been among the last words he recorded there. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive in Graceland. The world mourned the legend. Newspapers across the country printed his silhouette like a fallen icon. Radio stations played his music on repeat. Fans gathered outside the gates singing softly in candlelight. But no one knew that somewhere, beneath their feet, hidden behind a locked door, sat the room where Elvis had left behind the only truth he was ever truly afraid to share. The tapes remained untouched, the red light on the recorder still, faintly glowing until its power finally faded. The room was sealed out of respect, or perhaps out of fear, by those who loved him, those who knew the world wasn't ready to meet the Elvis he had recorded in those midnight hours. Years passed. Graceland became a museum, a pilgrimage for millions who wanted to walk where he walked, see the piano he played, touch the walls he lived within. Tour guides spoke of his gold records, his pink Cadillac, his army service, his movie roles, his triumphant returns. But they never spoke of the secret door at the end of a quiet hallway, or the tapes stored in a forgotten cabinet gathering dust. It wasn't until decades later, when the property was being quietly restored, that a carpenter found the door covered behind a faded wallpaper panel. When it creaked open, the room was still silent, frozen in time, as though Elvis had just stepped out and would return any minute. The air smelled faintly of cedar and age. The tape machine sat exactly where it had always been, a cup with a ring of dried coffee beside it, the chair slightly angled toward the door. The discovery was kept quiet, shared only with a small group of historians and family. They listened to a few tapes, but not all. Some said it was too personal, too raw, like stepping into someone's private prayers. They heard his voice, not the polished voice of a superstar, but the trembling confession of a man who carried the world and could no longer feel his own heartbeat beneath the weight. Some wept. Some asked for the tapes to be sealed forever, not because they were shameful, but because they were sacred. The last place where Elvis Presley was not performing, but simply existing. What became of those tapes remains uncertain. Some believe they are still locked in a vault, protected by his family. Others whisper they were destroyed, honored by fire like a letter never meant to be read. But the room remains empty, silent, a heartbeat preserved in concrete and memory. And if you stand there long enough, beneath the soft hum of the old ventilation system, you might almost hear him breathing softly, whispering into the dark, trying to make peace with the boy he once was and the legend he became. Because what no one tells you about Elvis's secret recording room is that it wasn't built to hide his voice from the world. It was built so he could finally hear it himself. The old iron door groaned as it opened, and a musty stillness filled the air, like time itself had been holding its breath inside Elvis's hidden recording room for decades. Lisa stood frozen, her heartbeat echoing louder than the silence, her fingertips brushing the rough, concrete walls that once hid her father from the world. The journalist carefully lifted the final tape from a dust-covered box, the label written in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting. "If anyone finds this, my truth." The tape recorder clicked, followed by a soft crackle, and then a tired, fragile voice. Elvis Presley spoke, not as a king or icon, but as a weary man. "If you're hearing this, it means I ain't around no more." People think Elvis Presley died a legend, but they don't know the weight of that name. Lisa's eyes welled as she whispered, "Daddy." Elvis continued, his voice trembling with honesty. He spoke of how in 1977, when the world believed he had died, he had actually retreated to this very room, suffocated by fame, addiction, and the loneliness of being loved by millions but known by none. "I planned it all. The doctors, the papers, the silence. I didn't want to die. I just wanted to stop being Elvis for a while." He confessed he stayed hidden here, surrounded by unfinished songs and memories, until he heard Lisa crying on the phone one night, begging for her father to come home. "I couldn't stay away after that. I came back, but my body never recovered. My heart was already tired." The tape shifted, and suddenly a piano melody began, soft, tender, almost like a prayer. Elvis's voice began to sing a song no one had ever heard before, a lullaby written only for his daughter. "You are the quiet in my storm. You're the place I call home. Even when I'm gone, my little girl, my love will guide you through this world." Lisa fell to her knees, tears streaming as she covered her mouth to stop herself from crying out loud. Around the room, letters written in faded ink lay bundled with string, each one addressed to her. She opened one with shaking hands. "Dear Lisa, I don't know if I'll get to say this as your daddy again, face to face. I'm scared of dying, but I'm more scared you'll grow up not knowing the real me. Not Elvis, just Dad. If you ever find this room, take the music with you, but leave the pain here." Lisa pressed the letter to her chest, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I forgive you, Daddy." The journalist, standing near the doorway, whispered, "Lisa, these tapes could change history. What do you want to do?" Lisa slowly stood, wiping her tears. She looked around at the piano, still waiting for one more melody, at the microphone still standing like a witness, at the ghosts of memories sealed in dust and silence. Then she said softly, but firmly, "The world loved Elvis Presley. But this room, this was his heart. This was for me. Some truths don't belong to the world." She took only one tape, the lullaby, and gently turned off the light. The door closed with a soft click, and darkness embraced the room once more. A year later, Lisa stood at Graceland's balcony at sunset, holding a small music box. When she opened it, her father's secret song, the one meant only for her, floated into the warm Tennessee air. She never sold the tapes. She never revealed the room. But she kept one promise. Elvis wasn't just a king. He was a man. And that's why he'll never be forgotten.